Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the WEIM Governing Body General Session meeting. Please note that all audio connections are muted at this time. With that, I'll turn the conference over to Chair Rob Konziolka. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Roy. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the October 2022 WEIM Governing Body meeting. At this point, I'd like to turn the meeting over to Corporate Secretary Roger Collington for the roll call.
Thank you, Chair Konziolka. We'll start with you, Chair Konziolka.
Here.
Vice Chair Gardner. Jennifer, can you hear me?
Sure, thank you.
Thank you. I'll take that as a here. Member Campbell.
Here.
Member Decker.
Here.
And Member Prescott.
Here.
Back to you, Chair Konziolka.
Thank you. At this point, we will open this up for public comment. And as usual, if you have a public comment not related to anything that's already on the agenda, this would be the time for that. So, Roy, if you would proceed to see if we have anyone wanting to make a comment.
To make a comment, please click on the raise hand icon at the bottom of the Zoom window. You will be asked to unmute when it is your turn. Please accept the unmute request, state your name and affiliation before making your comment. If you are connected separately over the phone, please press #2 on your telephone keypad. You will hear a notification when your line is unmuted. At that time, please then state your name, affiliation before making your comment. All right, looks like we have no comments at this time.
Very good, thank you. We'll move on, and our next agenda item is the approval of the August 30th, 2022 General Session minutes. At this point in time, I'm going to turn it back over to Roger.
Thank you, Rob. Can we have a motion to approve the August 30th, 2022 General Session minutes for the WEIM governing body?
So moved.
Thank you, Member Decker. And second? Thank you, Member Prescott. And your vote, Chair Konziolka?
Aye.
Vice Chair Gardner?
Aye.
Member Campbell?
Aye.
Member Decker?
Aye.
And Member Prescott?
Aye.
Thank you, governing body. The motion passes.
Okay, well, thank you. And before I go to agenda item 3, I have a few opening remarks. I'd like to start with last month, the Western Interconnection experienced a significant heat wave. No surprise to anybody listening to this call. As you will note in the CEO report, the CAISO and Western Interconnection set all new tying peaks. Interestingly, there is a push to have NOAA, which is the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, name heat waves of this size, magnitude, and duration, just as they do with hurricanes and cold weather systems. I think we all recognize that these are significant events, and according to NOAA, more people die from heat wave events than hurricanes or cold weather events. Recognizing the significance of what happened last month, we will hear from the Department of Market Monitoring on their detailed analysis, findings, and recommendations of how the WEIM participants fared with their resource efficiency during the September heat wave. An item to note is that we have made a change to the WEIM website. Within the governing body section of the website, information related to the governing body market expert, Susan Pope, has been added. The governing body expected to have their first report from the governing body market expert on resource sufficiency evaluation enhancements phase 2. Even though this decisional item has been deferred, we are proceeding with having the presentation material that our market expert developed posted. So look for this next week on the website. After the CEO report, we will receive updates on the latest activities and plans by the BOSSR and RIF. And lastly, there is new news on the policy initiatives. We'll receive updates on direction, schedules, on the following items: resource sufficiency evaluation enhancements phase 2, energy storage, EDAM and DAME, transmission service and market scheduling priorities phase 2, or as we all like to say, otherwise commonly referred to as wheel throughs. This concludes my opening remarks. So next on our agenda is agenda item 3, which is a report from our Cal ISO President and CEO, Elliot Mainzer.
Well, thank you very much, Chair Kanzioka and members of the governing body. It's good to see all of you, and appreciate your introductory comments. I'm going to start my CEO report today with just a little bit of a heavy heart. I think we're all still feeling tremendously the loss of our just wonderful colleague Therese Hampton, at the end of September. And I know we're going to have a chance to formally recognize her and her legacy tomorrow at the joint session. But for all of us at the ISO who worked with her, myself, known her for many, many years, this was just such a gifted person, such a wonderful, member of the Western energy community who just had such a unique touch, and her contributions to just where we're sitting today and where we've come over the years in the West just can't be overestimated. And I just wanted to acknowledge, her legacy, and just that we're going to be carrying her in our hearts for many, many years to come, and looking forward to further recalling her, just her wonderful spirit tomorrow. So I wanted to start there. And as Chair Kanzioka, as you mentioned, yes, we made it through the first 2/3 of summer, and then summer really came back with a vengeance around Labor Day. The heat wave, which at this point remains unnamed, I'm sure we'll come up with something, was a very, very significant event. One of the most intense heat waves we've ever seen in California, extended across a good portion of the West. Fortunately, not all of the West, but a significant fraction. We broke many records. Certainly, all-time demand record in the California ISO system, 52,061 megawatts. All-time record for RC West at about 130.9 thousand megawatts. And the all-time demand record for the Western Interconnection at 167,500 megawatts. So this was a serious, serious event. It seemed to just keep coming in wave after wave after wave. And it really was a remarkable moment, really, not just for us here at the ISO, but for all of us across California, across the Western energy community, who worked together to get through that event without having to call for rotating outages. I'll just highlight a couple of things just for today. Certainly, all of the new capacity that's come on the system in the last few years, over 8,000 megawatts contributed. The batteries were a significant contributor to reliability over this period at time. The strategic reserve that the California Energy Commission, California PUC have developed the last couple of years provided some additional emergency resource. Just the sheer amount of coordination and communication that happened every single day, phone calls with the governor's office and the utilities across California, both the publics, the IOUs, CCAs, working together, understanding the conditions that were coming down for each day. And then, of course, really the advent of sort of a remarkable demand response moment with the wireless emergency alert that was triggered at about 5:50 p.m. on the evening of the 6th, with kind of a remarkable response by Californians in demonstrating just the sheer physical capability for DR to play a role in the reliability solution. I think for us at the ISO 2, I think additional really important things that I think are worth mentioning to the WEIM community. First of all, during this event, this was the first, I'd say, moment that we've faced in the last couple of years where we've had to really sort of walk the talk about partnering with folks both inside and outside of California. And I was very committed, stayed very close touch with our partners in other states, particularly the Desert Southwest. We supported the wheel throughs through to Nevada in particular, who was very dependent upon them during that period, and really operated the grid with kind of a regional mentality, which I think is increasingly important as we explore EDAM and beyond. And really also very grateful for the support that we received from other states, and also the fact that we were able to reciprocate under certain conditions. I think was a galvanizing moment for all of us, and just further recognition of our interconnectedness here in the West. Another thing that I'll point out is that throughout the entire event, Mark Rothgater and I would go through sort of a thought experiment each night as we would be watching the pie screens and watching everything happening on the system. And as we basically try to imagine how the world would be looking different if we actually had the extended day-ahead market in operation during that event. And I think we could almost physically feel that the increased visibility and transparency and liquidity that would be available on a day-ahead basis would have been a significant addition to the mix in terms of promoting greater reliability across the footprint, mitigating the need for EEA watches and emergency status, and ultimately giving us all greater confidence that we can find a solution to that reliability challenge. So I'm very obviously just even more motivated and more committed to making EDAM a reality and continuing to optimize across that wide footprint across the Western United States. Of course, we are still deep into the process of conducting our own analysis of the heat wave event. We'll hear a number of things today from DMM. Very important to not only highlight what worked, but also the lessons learned, to be very transparent, whether it's resource efficiency, taking a look at storage, looking at imports, exports. Those other issues are all really important. We can always learn, and where we find issues, we will take them on directly and transparently and get them fixed so that we can continue learning from events like this. So thanks again to everybody across the state, federal agencies, the utilities, all the load serving entities, the technology service providers for working together with us so effectively to get through that extraordinarily challenging event. I do want to mention with the extended day ahead market, the teams have been working their hearts out here the last couple of weeks. We received, again, several hundred pages of really, really thoughtful comments on the last version of the proposal. Those comments are now being synthesized into the final draft proposal. We're aiming to get that out here in the next several days, most likely case on the 31st. And so, again, just a huge tip of the hat of appreciation to all of the stakeholders across the West who've logged so much time and energy in our process and given us so much great input in that design and acknowledging all the other things that they've got going on. So thank you very much. We're really looking forward to not only getting that on the street, but then, of course, coming back to you in December with the final proposal for a really, really good substantive discussion there. I will just note, you'll hear tomorrow, again, a little bit more of the Governance Review Committee is also, I think, everything we're hearing, making just real progress, kind of finding that right balance for the next approach to governance for EDAM, and really looking forward to hearing the proposal, the latest from that group as well. So thanks to all the people working on that effort. Rob, you mentioned earlier that we have decided to take a little bit longer to work through the final details around the resource efficiency evaluation phase 2. These are such important issues. We got another round, I think, of really important feedback and input here just in the last few weeks from stakeholders, from the MSC, from DMM. We wanted to take just a little bit more time to try to really see if we can find a really good, thoughtful solution for this next round. You know, we want to get some of these features implemented for next year, and we just thought that process could take a little bit more time to factor in those issues. And then, of course, with respect to transmission service and market scheduling priorities, aka wheel through, again, that group is also making a lot of progress. The next iteration of that proposal will be in mid-November. We are in the process of running analysis and looking at scenarios to calculate available inventory while, of course, ensuring reliable service to native load. So again, great progress on that front. And it was, as I said earlier, very encouraging this summer under a real edge case to be able to support those transfers across the system and make sure that we're working together as an integrated energy community. The last thing I'll mention here is we are getting very excited for the Stakeholder Symposium on November 9th and 10th at the Safe Credit Union and Convention Center in Sacramento. This is the first time we've had a Stakeholder Symposium since 2018, and we're just really excited to get the Western energy community together and see everybody and just really celebrate all the progress and the many challenges that we're taking on together. We're very fortunate we'll have a guest appearance from Energy Secretary Granholm. We've got a fabulous panels drawn from utility leadership across the West, the regulatory community. I think a really interesting session on transmission and regional coordination. We'll hear from Sarah Edmonds of the Western Power Pool and John Hairston of the Bonneville Power Administration. Karen Douglas, Governor Newsom's Senior Energy Advisor, will be there. Get a chance for folks to see her in her new role. And, of course, Jan Smutney-Jones from IEP. And then we're also on the second day, we're also going to have a chance to hear from a video appearance from Chair Holden on his Assembly Concurrent Resolution 188 about the next phase of governance conversations in California. We'll hear from Senators Chris Brooks and Chris Hansen, who've been very involved in the Western Regional conversation. And then on day 2, we'll have a chance to hear from a customer panel as we continue to try to beef up our stakeholder and customer service experience. And finally, I think a very thoughtful panel moderated by Alex Morris of the Storage Association of California on the future of technological innovation on the path to a clean energy grid. So thanks to Joanne, Serena, and her team, and everybody that's doing all this work. I think I heard this morning, asked Joanne for the update. I think we currently have 775 people registered for the Stakeholder Symposium. So it's going to be a fabulous event. Can't wait to see many of you there. And I just wanted to, on behalf of all of us at the ISO, thank all of our partners and colleagues across the West who not only worked with us through the September event, but just in general, leaning in to try to keep this wonderful region working together and making progress. So thanks again, and happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Elliot, thank you for your report, and I will echo your first comments that all the governing body members have heavy hearts on the loss of Therese, and they all had a personal relationship with her. Governing body members, do any of you have any questions for Elliot? Okay.
Thank you.
Elliot, thank you very much. No questions.
My pleasure. Thanks, Bob.
Next agenda item, we have the chair of the Utah PSC, Pat LeVar, giving us an update on the body of state regulators. As a reminder that Chair LeVar is also the chair of the BOSSR. Chair LeVar.
Thank you, and good afternoon, Chair Konziolka, Vice Chair Gardner, and members of the WEIM governing body. I'm happy to provide this report from the body of state regulators today, addressing our recent, current, and upcoming BOSSR activities. We held the fall 2022 BOSSR in-person meeting last month in Tempe, Arizona. During that meeting, we received an update from members of the Governance Review Committee on the latest developments and planned governance for the extended day-ahead market. Of course, this discussion was somewhat somber on the heels of Therese Hampton's tragic accident that week, and we just, again, want to add our deepest condolences and recognize her significant contribution to so many issues throughout the Western Interconnection. The governance presentations were well received by BOSSR members at that meeting. There continues to be broad support for the work of the GRC, and in particular for the continuation of the joint governance model that has been in place this year. BOSSR members appreciate the balance that is being struck between respecting the governance changes that have been recently implemented with the continued evolution of governance to be more multilateral as the ISO implements market initiatives that involve the dispatch and control of more resources over longer periods of time. We view this in the BOSSR as an evolution, not a revolution, and we look forward to the upcoming release of the revised straw proposal for EDAM governance and for our opportunity to submit formal consensus comments on that proposal. During our September meeting in Tempe, we also heard from stakeholders with diverse perspectives on the Transmission Service and Market Scheduling Priorities Initiative. Because this is an issue that currently rests with advisory rather than joint authority, the BOSSR is not intending at this time to provide formal comments. However, some BOSSR members represent jurisdictions with significant interest in this issue, and this meeting was a meaningful opportunity to educate ourselves and ask questions of the presenters. We appreciate everyone who is willing to speak during our meeting, and we value the ongoing work to continue addressing wheel-through priorities. The BOSSR is currently in process of providing a 3-day Western Electricity Markets Training Forum. Last week, members of the ISO representatives of the ISO trained participants on day-ahead market functions and transactions. This week, 2 Stanford University professors will be providing hands-on simulations to help BOSSR members and staff understand how the bidding process works, as well as transmission availability in the day-ahead market. I want to express my personal appreciation to those from the ISO and from WIRAB who have planned and coordinated this training. I regret that rate case hearings have prevented me from personally participating in this valuable exercise, but the reports I'm hearing so far are that it's going well and is very meaningful. The BOSSR continues to monitor the Extended Day-Ahead Market Design Initiative. We look forward to the upcoming publication of the draft final proposal, and we intend to submit consensus comments after reviewing it. BOSSR members generally continue to be optimistic about this process. We look forward to being a part of the discussion as individual utilities make their final decisions about joining the Extended Day-Ahead Market. Some BOSSER members represent jurisdictions where regulator approval will be a prerequisite to a utility's participation, but in other BOSSER jurisdictions, that kind of approval process is not a legal requirement. Despite the different jurisdictional perspectives from which we all arrive at the issue, we appreciate the transparent way it continues to progress and the opportunities we've had to review and comment on the developments. Moving on, some BOSSER members will be speaking on a panel at the California ISO Stakeholder Symposium on November 9th. This panel will focus on collaboration among the Western states as we share our views on market design, governance, and the opportunities to unlock benefits and maximize cost savings for the electricity customers in our states. We look forward to seeing many of you there at that panel. And finally, I have a couple of updates with respect to BOSSER membership. With the recent departure of Leah Fisher as a BOSSER liaison due to career change, Mary Winke from the Public Generating Pool has agreed to step into that liaison role. We appreciate Mary's willingness to do that for the remainder of Leah's term as a BOSSER liaison. Also, in anticipation of El Paso Electric's plans to implement participation in the Western Energy Imbalance market this spring, the Texas Public Utility Commission has designated Commissioner Jimmy Glotfelty to represent that commission on the BOSSER. We appreciate his interest in participating in our meetings as the Western Energy Imbalance market footprint moves into another state. Our next virtual BOSSER update meeting was rescheduled to Friday, November 4th, due to a federal holiday on the normal date that we would hold that meeting. We hope for good attendance and discussion despite that change in the date. And I am happy to answer any questions from anyone. Thank you for the chance to provide this report.
Commissioner Waller, thank you for your report, and I'm checking with the governing body members to see if they have any questions for you. Chair LeVar, no questions, so thank you.
Thank you.
Our next agenda item 5, is an update on the Regional Issues Forum. And with us today is the chair of the RIF, BJ Satel. And BJ, are you there?
Yes, I'm there, Rob. Hello.
Excellent.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. I will start off right off the bat by conveying RIF's expression of thanks and gratitude as well to Therese Hampton, who was very valuable resource and a personal colleague for 6-7 years, at least for me, but was offering good input and giving ideas for how RIF can work better in the last year and a half when I took on this role. So FYI on that one. I requested a little extra time than the usual 5-8 minutes, partly because we have actually the end of the year kind of summary on the RIF update, and I have some of my RIF colleagues on the call, so I'm glad they can join in and hold me accountable if I miss something. But we were successful this year in holding 4 RIF meetings, starting with January 25th, May 4th, September 1, and we have a big one coming up on November 8th. And for that, Rob, I think you may remember I requested the EIM Governing Body Chair, Rob Kanzioka and Elliot Mainzer, to be first up on the agenda. And the title of the panel is very exciting, What's on Your Mind? Because I think there's a lot on your mind every day, every week. So we look forward to hearing from you on whatever you may want to opine on. But if I can go back very quickly to what the RIF has accomplished this year, we started in January with the opening orientation with Anita Decker as the chair and helping us all with you, Rob, on the onboarding of the new RIF liaisons and the outgoing on what are the different ways we can engage. And we had that training orientation meeting, I remember, on January 24th. And then we did have a very good discussion on 25th on greenhouse gas accounting, CalISO's market runs. What does a market run really include? And then also the entry of WAPA into the EIM. That was all very insightful. Just want to give a bit of a recap on that. The May 4th meeting focused a lot on the GRC proposal that came out. Therese presented it, and we all may remember, for those who could attend, it was on the heels or post the WIRAP Prepsi meeting in San Diego. That was the first true in-person meeting of all the RIF liaisons, kind of like a post-COVID reunion. And it was a very good conversation setting on what is the expectations of the RIF, what can we contribute, and how do we engage. These have been the 3 common evolving themes of questions that the RIF has been struggling with debating, and we have come to some good ideas. So I have good news for you coming up. September 1 was a very more technical, nerdy conversation around a RIF panel discussion on the ISO roadmap. And we really thank Ann McKenna and her staff for providing follow-up updates, not just in the main meeting, but coming back and brainstorming on how the policy roadmap works and how changes could be implemented or requests could be taken. Along with that was a detailed, in-depth conversation on stress conditions in the EIM. What are stress conditions? How are they manifesting? How can they be managed? And how does that impact the EIM entities? And I give credit to some of our RIF liaisons who helped facilitate that. Kathleen Colbert, Matt Lecar, and Doug Boccioni. A lot of them had a lot of good ideas, and that shaped that panel. We are moving to the November 8th meeting, which we have strategically put right before the symposium. And a lot of credit to Holly Taylor for helping us ensure that we are not double dipping and not duplicating with the symposium. So we plan to have a bit of a coverage on SEAMS issues, more specifically on the WRAP, the RAP program, and its initiative vis-a-vis the California RA program. So where are the linkages and where they are not? That is my interpretation. I plead guilty for being away for a month. So my RIF team my colleagues have been very diligently planning this session and the agenda items. And we also have discussed a stress conditions follow-up discussion from the summer 2022 events that Elliot talked about at the beginning, and the efforts that CalISO staff led in managing for the larger entire footprint under ISO. But this focus will be on the EIM. And as I think, if I remember right, Chair Kanzioka and John Prescott, we've talked about is looking at the larger EIM footprint and focusing on how the larger EIM managed and survived with the stress conditions. One other interesting area I would like to bring to everybody's attention, please, is I like to call the spectrum of transition. How are we going to manage the transmission world moving from the existing contracts and the bilateral world into the future as we look to the EDAM? And I credit Doug Boccioni for that, who proposed that idea, and we have come up with an agenda item on that on November 8th. So we have an action-packed 3 items with a leaders panel at the beginning, and I will help close this out with opening welcome feedback on what the RIF should be working on for next year. One other item I would like to bring up is a very important item that the group, you all, the governing body members, with the very genuine and very welcoming challenge from Chair Decker in the past, and now with Chair Kanzioka, was how can the RIF be more engaged? One of the discussion items that's come up is an idea that's evolving and percolating in the RIF team. And thanks to CalISO legal staff providing input on specific questions the RIF members gave, RIF liaisons, my bad, I fall quickly to say RIF members, but the RIF liaisons, is how can we be more engaged in ways that we give formal input, but we are not in any way conflicting with the individual opinions of the RIF liaisons, representative entities, or market participants or stakeholders. So my words, a bit of an identity crisis for the RIF liaisons is how do we show our input and yet not jump over the perspectives of other representative members of the different sectors. So the conversation has evolved in the concept of some form of a roundtable idea, which everybody has gelled around, in my understanding, and we will be fleshing it out more in our liaison coordination call and then coming back hopefully for next year. So that is the summary on the RIF, what we've all done so far and what's coming on November 8th. And in closing, I would like to also thank and welcome Susan Pope for joining the EIM governing body as a market expert. And that's an area that I'm hoping, and I will be requesting the RIF leadership next year to take on and bring in an invitation to Ms. Pope and have a conversation for how we can be more connected on that end as well. This is the RIF update. I welcome any questions from anyone, please.
Do any of the governing body members have questions for VJ? Anita, please.
So maybe not so much a question, Vijay. Well, maybe there's a question embedded in this. So
Please, anything.
it was really nice to hear you kind of go through from last January to kind of where you are today. I know one of the things that at least me as the governing body member, I'm looking for and thirsty for when the RIF brings something before the governing body that like, yes, work in the stakeholder process, but gives us some heads up as a RIF to at least some common things that a number of stakeholder groups might have concerns about as we move through these initiatives. So I'm really looking forward to, as you guys fulfill the part of your charter that has to do with assisting us as part of our governance, I'm looking forward to seeing some presentations from the RIF itself.
I heard you. Can I do a quick follow-up question, please? When you mean by assisting you all in governance, in terms of the current approach or in terms of the process of giving feedback? I'm trying to understand what is meant there, because there's some clear boundaries for us on how and where we can engage. For example, we have been given informal feedback that it's better to give feedback right at the get-go, not in the middle or towards the end of a policy proposal being finalized, because that's not fair even on the governing body members. So I would love to get feedback on behalf of my liaison team is where and how do you see touch points for us to opine or give ideas? I think the RIF roundtable is a solidly dynamic idea in brainstorming things if we were to be informally aware ahead of time of what's coming up in the policy roadmap and how we can engage and set up and provide, I like to call information bursts of ideas or questions. But I would like to know what you're thinking, please.
So I think what I envision is, so you guys, so all the various RIF memberships and their sectors are working in the stakeholder process. So
correct.
Never should the stakeholder process be short-circuited. But occasionally there's something that doesn't seem to be resonating in the stakeholder process. And like, so not on the decision-making meeting, because then you're right, it's too late. But prior to a decision-making meeting, because normally there's 2 or 3 drafts, there's usually 1 or 2 things that aren't getting sorted very well that are in those drafts, and they're usually a month to 2 months before it comes to a decision. I think if enough of the RIF members, kind of like when the joint entities comment, if enough of the RIF members could say, this 1 or 2 thing is something we really want to see get resolved. And yes, we're in the stakeholder process. So stakeholder process is critical. I think bringing something to us that says, hey, we want you to keep your eye on these 1 or 2 particular things. I think it helps us keep our eye on those things by hearing from the RIF, because you guys are a part of our governance structure. If there was not a governing body, or there wouldn't be a RIF. So I think it's in your charter to talk with us, and particularly given the new charges from the last GRC. So no. I'm kind of waiting for that to happen.
Thank you. And you're absolutely right. We are a creation of you all. We are created through the EIM governing body, and we value that. I forgot to mention that we have come across, we have developed a RIF prioritization matrix with RIF topics of issues that we are very interested in. And that actually has driven some of these agenda topics. And I'm hoping, and I will, before I leave the chair role, I will make sure the new incoming chair and vice chair can help follow the RIF prioritization of topics. That gets to your one comment. And the second, I think we are very interested in finding some way to formalize some kind of input that we give into the decision-making process that is not impacting the formal individual entity representation, but yet shows a RIF brain trust of thinking and what we think. So we definitely want that. And please be aware that one of the ideas I will be working with the RIF liaisons to push for is having 1 or 2 of you attend some of our RIF meetings more actively and publicly, which I think Chair Kanzioka knows we have talked about before. So we would love to have that osmosis happen. But I agree. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments for BJ from the governing body? Okay, Vijay, I will end with that. We will have 3 of the governing body members at the RIF meeting next
Thank you.
month.
We appreciate that. Well, Chair Kanzioka, you have to be there. You're on the agenda. So thank you for that.
I will be one of those three.
Okay, if you didn't show up, I'm going to have to drive around and find the nearest governing body member in California. But thank you again, and I appreciate the update. Thank you. And a big thank you to Holly Taylor, who has worked with us this year very diligently with support from Stacey Crowley. I just want to put in a 2 cents of thank you to them. Thank you.
BJ, thank you very much. Our next agenda item is item 6, which is a briefing by the Department of Market Monitoring on the WEIM resource efficiency evaluation testing during the September or last month's heat wave. And with us today is Dr. Eric Hildenbrandt, who is the Executive Director of Market Monitoring at CAISO. Eric, are you there?
Okay, yeah. Can everybody hear me?
We can hear you. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
That's great. All right. Well, let's get to the first slide then. Thank you very much for being here. I think it's been maybe 6 months since we gave our last update, but we did commit to coming periodically to give an update on the performance of the residual or the RSE to the governing body. So this slide is just an overview. I have a lot of slides. If I don't get through them all, I wanted to give an overview up front. And so first of all, I'm going to go over, there were a number of phase 1 enhancements that were implemented in June. We did find a couple of those where there are some issues in how they were implemented. And the most significant one was in how batteries were accounted for. And we did some analysis of that, and it did have an impact on about 4 additional 15-minute intervals in terms of causing the ISO area to pass the test when it should not have passed. Moving then to the actual performance, we focused on the September heat wave. I think the first month of September was really a great period. It really tested not only the grid, but the RSE test as well. And I guess big picture is that given the really extremely high load conditions throughout the WEIM, that the overall test failures were, I would say, relatively low, considering the extremely high load conditions. We did focus, as you'll see in the presentation, on the 5th and the 6th. Most of the failures occurred on those days, so we drilled in on those. Most balancing areas that failed the test during this period were importing relatively small amounts or even small net exporters through the EIM. The one exception was the California ISO area, and that area was a significant importer during really all the net peak hours of those days, including the intervals when the ISO balancing area did fail the test. So it was importing, you'll see, an average of about 1,600 megawatts during those intervals. However, the import limits that result currently from failing the test did not have a significant impact on limiting additional imports into the ISO or really any other balancing area. So just to refresh your memory on that is, there is a limit that is triggered when an area fails the test, but oftentimes that limit isn't binding anyways in the 15 or the 5-minute market. So in the end, it oftentimes does not end up actually limiting imports. Finally, we were going to just reiterate some recommendations, that we've made in the past, and we are, recommending that the ISO and stakeholders continue to consider other financial consequences or other consequences of failing the test, and as well, we think further analysis is warranted of the uncertainty adder before and consideration of that before that's added back into the test. I'll just note here, this presentation, it's not intended to be a review or discussion of the market design efforts going underway to modify the test. That's on a separate track and a whole separate stakeholder process. But just to merely note there that DMM is actively participating in that. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, this next slide reviews the changes that were implemented in June. You may recall some of these. They were presented to the board and the governing body. The uncertainty component representing intertie uncertainty was removed from the test on June 1st. Just to remind you, the net load uncertainty component was removed back in February 15th. And those changes, particularly the net load uncertainty component, that did have an impact in terms of making the test, the capacity test, easier to pass. And one thing you'll see this summer is that did result more of the failures, a higher percentage, were due to the flexibility test, which does continue to have an uncertainty component in it. Another change was to exclude long start units that are offline or short start units that fail to start up from the capacity test. This was implemented. It can, in some cases, have a significant impact. So that change was implemented. The next two changes, we found some issues with the implementation. And the first one is accounting for the state of charge of batteries coming into the test. And specifically, the way it was implemented, overcounts batteries, essentially battery capacity that would be unavailable due to the state of charge. And at the end, I have some analysis of that if we get time, I'll present that. Another change that we found was had some issues with the implementation was to reduce the ISO import awards that are counted in the test based on the tagging profiles submitted at T-40. So both of those the ISO is working on to get corrected. The flexibility test, another change, it now accounts for any power balance constraint shortage, in the prior hours. Demand response, which is taken, which aren't accounted for in the test, so kind of out-of-market demand response can be submitted as a load adjustment. I don't believe that was utilized this summer. And the ISO now is excluded from the distribution of any potential revenues from the failing of the test. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the blue line is the total WEIM and ISO load together. And the yellow line is the ISO load. And the bars represent the number of test failures, so by different balancing areas on each of these days. You'll see the lion's share of failures here occurred on the 5th and 6th, and that does coincide with, extremely high loads, not only in the ISO area, but throughout the WEIM. So again, I think these were record loads, or at least record temperatures in California. So given those system conditions, I think this is actually a relatively small number of failures. Next slide, please. This next slide shows a matrix drilling in now on September 5th and 6th during the net peak hours. It shows the frequency of the failures of all the different balancing areas. So I think on these 2 days, there's 12 different balancing areas that failed the test during at least one interval. So you can see here that the failures were relatively widespread, but not, not excessive, I guess I would say in any case. The red boxes, or the boxes highlighted with a red border, are the ones in which, by our analysis, the ISO should have failed the capacity test if battery capacity had been properly accounted for and calculated. Next slide, please. And I'll mention actually all these charts and slides, they are included in our monthly report, which we got posted yesterday. So it's now up on the ISO and the DMM website. So the governing body and stakeholders can go there for a more detailed set of charts and a discussion explanation of these. So this chart here shows the net transfers from each balancing area that were occurring during the intervals when those areas failed the test. And as you'll see here, so the ISO clearly stands out here. The light blue bars shows the California ISO area, and it failed the test. Let's see, this is September 6th. So during 2 intervals when the ISO failed the test on those days, it was a significant importer. This is in the 15-minute market. So that's how much it was importing, and it was capped at that level. The other areas, you can see there were test failures, but the positive numbers were, relatively small imports in some areas, and you can see many areas were actually exporting, having net exports in the intervals when they failed the test. That's shown by the negative bars there. So from here, I should say, the rest of the presentation does focus more on the California ISO area. That is because, as you see in this slide, the ISO did stand out as the major, as being the greatest importer in intervals when it did fail the test. Another reason we focus on that is, as I mentioned, the battery issue, which caused the ISO to pass in some cases, only affected the ISO. The ISO is the only area with significant battery capacity that is bid into the market, the EIM market. And finally, the California area is the only area that publishes when it goes into an emergency stage 2 or 3. The ISO we're in those stages. So that's something we like to juxtapose next to how the capacity test was working. And there were some other emergencies throughout the West, but the ISO is the only balancing area that currently posts that on their website, makes that information public. Next slide, please. Okay, so this next slide shows the blue bars, positive blue bars, again, is the amount that the California ISO was importing through the EIM. The red lines there show the 2 intervals on the 6th. I believe this is September 6th when the ISO area failed the test. You can see here the yellow bars show all the other net imports of all the other areas which were importing during those intervals. So you can see here that there were a very small amount of imports flowing to other balancing areas, and the majority of the energy being transferred in the EIM was being exported into the California market. So the green bars represent all the total amount of exports by all the areas which were net exporters in the EIM. As I mentioned here, you can see this is the day the ISO was in EA2 and in EA3. So the 2 failures did occur during the period in which the ISO was in an EEA3 emergency. Next slide, please. So this next chart shows kind of a metric that we calculate. So it takes each of those intervals that I showed in which a balancing area failed the test, and you see those number of intervals in the left-hand column. The green part of the table shows the intervals in which the import limit was not binding. In other words, so kind of the way we look at it is an area fails the test, there is an import limit that takes effect, but But if that import limit is not binding, then that's not having an impact on limiting imports into that area. If that import limit ended up to be binding, we can say that that import limit may have limited flows into that area. So this chart really shows you what percent of intervals that limit was binding and which percent it was not binding, and then it shows the net import or export during those intervals. Again, you'll see on here that the California balancing area during the 15-minute or 5-minute intervals on the 5th and the 6th, the 5-minute limit was never binding during any of those intervals. The limit was about an average of 3,000 megawatts, but the actual 5-minute import was only about 1,600. And I'll explain that through another slide, why that is, why the 5-minute flows end up to be significantly lower than the limit. The other note is you can see in some other areas the import limit was binding, so it could have been limiting additional flows that may have occurred, and it shows you there the average amounts of imports that were occurring during those intervals. So that gives an indication of how often, if you were to relax that constraint and allow more energy to flow, how often that may have occurred and kind of what the condition was in that area during those intervals. Next slide, please. So this next slide, again, it uses the California ISO area and the 6th as kind of an example to show you. I just wanted to walk through, again, refresh your memory as to how the test is calculated. So this slide shows how the requirements are calculated. And so that is basically the red line is the load forecast plus export base schedule that are scheduled out of an area. So the red line becomes the requirement. That's then compared to the generation base schedules from resources within each balancing area, as well as the base schedules of the imports. That would be the blue bars. So those are energy. Keep in mind the bars are energy, and the red bar is is the requirement. So it's the gap between the red line and the bars that becomes the requirement for unloaded capacity that each area needs to have. So it needs to have, on top of the energy schedule, enough unloaded capacity to meet that requirement. And I'll just a reminder here that WEIM transfers are not included in the imports that are counted as supply in the test. It's only the base schedule. Next slide, please. So I apologize. Some of these slides I would have put them in a little different order, but this slide shows you another issue and that explains a lot of the results, which is the California ISO operators. They do use a large load bias on the high load days. Typically, that's been about 3,000 megawatts, but during the September heat wave, it was pretty consistently 5,000 megawatts. So it's a very high load adjustment that's made in the hour head and the 15-minute market. That's where a lot of the procurement of imports occurs and the commitment of different units within the ISO. And then in the 5-minute market, you'll see the bias is much lower, and that's closer to the real load. So that explains when you'll see other slides, the ISO has a lot of imports that are scheduled through the ISO markets on an hour head basis. But then it has extra capacity in the 5-minute market. So a lot of schedules are backed off, including the WEIM transfers are much higher in the 15-minute market than they are in the 5-minute market. So this bias explains that result that you will see on another of my charts. Next slide, please. Okay, so this next chart shows you, again, looking at the six, the light blue bars are the WEIM imports to the California ISO in the 15-minute market. And then the dark blue bars show you what was actually transferred in the 5-minute market. And again, you'll see the 15-minute imports are always higher than the 5-minute significantly. And again, this reflects the fact there's a large load bias in that 15-minute market, which goes down significantly in the 5-minute market. Next slide, please. So this next slide, I apologize, I probably should have put this right after the slide where I showed you the gap. So the gap between the scheduled energy, the base schedules for energy, and the total load plus exports. So again, I mentioned that gap needs to be covered with unloaded capacity to pass the test. So this next chart, the red line shows the size of that gap. So that's the requirement for the capacity test. And then the bars show the different available capacity in the ISO area that were available. Again, this was September 6th. So this highlights the key role that batteries play. The yellow represents batteries. So you'll see actually, the ISO now this year has over 3,000 megawatts of battery capacity installed, and that did play a major role in terms of the unloaded capacity that allowed the ISO to pass the test. When it did, you'll see here there were two intervals where the ISO barely failed the test in hour ending 19. Next slide, please. This next slide shows let's see, again, taking the 6, it shows how much of that capacity was actually unavailable. As I mentioned, we actually found a number of things that appear to have been implemented in a way where they're overcounting battery capacity. And there's a couple different flavors of those, ranging from, it's not accounting for the maximum capacity of the battery correctly. Some capacity was unavailable due to an ancillary service obligation. Some is unavailable due to a minimum state of charge. So there's different reasons why the battery capacity was overcounted. This shows you those different categories, and that the net effect there is, significant amount, I guess in some intervals, almost 1,000 megawatts of capacity, which by our calculation was unavailable, but was counted in the test. Next slide, please. So this slide here just shows the impact. Again, if we go back and we estimate, what the amount of battery capacity was actually available was on these days, we get, I believe on this day, 3 additional 15-minute intervals when the ISO area would have failed, in addition to the other 2 intervals where it did fail the test. So I guess it had a significant impact in terms of both the quantity of capacity that was overcounted and the number of additional intervals as well. So finally, just again, recommendations, just to reiterate, we do support, continuing to look at other options for modifying the consequence of failing the resource efficiency test, including potentially a financial charge of some kind. We do support the issue of removing low priority exports from the requirements that are currently calculated for the ISO balancing area. And finally, on the uncertainty test, we note here that a new approach is being implemented for the uncertainty adder, or for calculating uncertainty that's used in the flexible ramping products, and that's being implemented in December. That same method is used to calculate uncertainty that's put into the flexible ramping test as well. So it does affect the flexible ramping test. And so we're going to closely monitor that approach, see how it's working, and then we're recommending monitor that first, see how it's working, and then consider different approaches before adding uncertainty back into the capacity test, if that's to be done. So we can get some experience with this new approach before considering if that would be appropriate for adding uncertainty back into the capacity test. So that wraps it up for me. I'm glad to take any questions.
Eric, thank you for this analysis and these recommendations. John Prescott has a question for you.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Hey, Eric, thanks for this presentation, and thanks for your team to put this together. I know it's a lot of work, but we really appreciate it. So if we could go back a couple of slides, I think it was slide 21, if the numbering was correct on the slides. I got a couple of questions about that. Keep going back. I think it's like this slide, but go back. One more. Yeah, this one. So, no.
18. Slide, yeah, one more. Advanced one.
Advanced.
There you go. Yeah, that's it. So I'm just looking at this, and I just want to be clear. So as I look at the x-axis, and I see up to 6,000. So this isn't showing the mix at that increment of generation. What it's showing is available unloaded generation available. Is that how you describe it? Okay, then so there could be a lot more gas because it shows there, there's not a lot of gas, but there might have been carrying load at that time. Okay.
Yeah, this is just extra unloaded capacity as calculated by the test.
So I guess, and maybe this is a silly engineer question, but how do you have unloaded solar?
Let's see. Okay, that's a very minor amount in 50.
I'm just curious. I mean,
yeah. I'll have to
Can I answer this?
Yeah, go ahead, Mark.
Yeah. So you could have some unloaded solar because there may have been some solar that was constrained due to some congestion, and so it may have been back down at those times. There was some curtailment of solar during some of those times.
Oh, okay, thanks. That's helpful. I was just trying to get my head around that. But yeah, no other questions. Thanks.
Thank you, John. Andy, you've got a question.
Yes, thank you, Eric. Thanks for this presentation, and thanks for all the analysis that the DMM team has been doing on the RSE and continues to do. It's extremely valuable to the market, for us as a board, just to get transparency and understand this sort of complex and foundational framework. A question, slide 13, which has sort of the EEA lines kind of superimposed there. Yeah, so my question, would you expect there to be a relationship between when EEA events are called and whether the RSE test is passed or failed? And what relationship, if any?
I mean, I would expect a positive relationship. But, clearly there's failures when the ice is not in an emergency, and it doesn't necessarily fail the test when it is an emergency. The ISO operators, as I understand it, they have to call the emergency in advance. They take a number of actions, during an emergency to increase supply. I know demand went way down when they did declare an emergency. Demand went way down. So, in the end, it's possible for the ISO to pass the test when it's in an emergency, and fail when it's not. But I would expect a positive relationship for sure.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Andy. Any other questions from the governing body? Okay, seeing none, I'd like to now ask the public if there are any questions or comments that you want to bring up. Roy, at this time, if we could see if there's anyone who would like to ask a question or make a comment.
Once again, if you would like to make a comment, please click on that raise hand icon at the bottom of the Zoom window. And again, if you are phone only, you can go ahead and press #2 on your telephone keypad to enter the comment queue. All right, it looks like we have no comments at this time.
Okay, thank you. And Eric, thank you for your presentation. You know, this is something that is just really of great interest to us and all the EIM participants. And as you do further analysis and work, if there are other items that are identified, we would hope that you would want to bring those back and present those. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Eric.
Mark has a comment, Rob.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mark.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Kanzioka. I do want to express appreciation for DMM's review, but I also wanted to, as Elliot mentioned in the CEO report, I wanted to confirm that the ISO was in the process of completing its comprehensive review of September heat wave events. As a result of this review, we also identified a few other resource efficiency calculation scenarios that did not work as intended, in addition to the ones that DMM mentioned today. We observed that these scenarios can cause both under and over accounting of resource efficiency capability. It appears that some of these issues may have been introduced while implementing past summer resource efficiency enhancements or related to newer types of resources such as storage at larger scale. While several of the identified issues have now been resolved, solutions have been identified or are in progress of being implemented for two of the issues DMM discussed today. We look forward to sharing the results of our review at a future meeting. Thank you.
Mark, thank you. That was spot on. And we realize and recognize that one is phase one was just implemented in June. The heat wave just occurred last month. These types of analyses, one, take time to perform. And then two, once you perform those analyses, figuring out where you go with those next steps is the next step, which is always a bit of a challenge at this point. But you address, I think, the bigger issue of do we have resource sufficiency evaluation right, or do we need some additional refinement? And Elliot, I see that you want to make some comments.
Yeah, Rob, I just wanted to add an exclamation point. I know last year when it was decided for the DMM to do the reporting out on the sufficiency test, I just think that was really important. I think we all recognize the importance of transparency and really developing a rigorous understanding of these issues. The resource efficiency evaluation is such a key element of the trust underlying the market. And I just wanted, along with Mark, just to reiterate our appreciation for the thoroughness of the work that the DMM is doing. It's going to make us stronger. Their input in is going to be great, and we're looking forward to working with DMM and others. We want to get to the heart of each and every one of these, continue to strengthen our market and learn from these experiences. So just wanted to express my appreciation as well, and looking forward to the next steps in what I think is a very appropriate and healthy process of inquiry. So thank you very much.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's glad to hear that. So if there are no other items on the work that DMM has done, we'll move on to our next agenda item, which is agenda item 8, which is a briefing on policy initiatives. I already went over what they are. You can see them, they'll be covered. And this is going to be addressed by Anna McKenna, who is the Vice President for Market Policy and Performance. Anna, I'll turn this over to you.
Thank you, Chair Kanzioka. Good afternoon, governing body members, members of the public, and colleagues. Thank you for this opportunity to brief you on a number of continuing stakeholder policy initiatives that affect regional markets. I'll be covering a number of those today. As you can see on the slide, the Resource Efficiency Evaluation Phase 2 initiative, energy storage enhancements, extended day-ahead market. I also will touch on the day-ahead market and finally on the transmission service and scheduling priorities. With regards to the resource efficiency evaluation, as Elliot noted earlier in his comments. We were on track to come to you this month with a proposal that looked at the provision of assistance energy to the WEIM. As you might recall, earlier this year, we engaged and we initiated a phase 2 to look specifically to the possibility of providing assistance energy out of the WEIM after parties had noted that under the current rules in which when parties fail the test, there is a consequence that limits transfers to the last level of transfers that were previously allowed when parties had passed the test. And this raised a concern both from a market efficiency perspective as well as reliability perspective. So in the second phase of the initiative, and I should have noted, the RSCE initiative, as it's known, we've been actually engaged in looking at enhancements to the RSE now for some time. But the second phase of the initiative was really focused on coming up with a solution to address this issue and some other issues that could be implemented by next summer. Because the hope was that by next summer, we could have something at play that folks can opt into for purposes of accessing assistance energy through the Western EIM. But as Elliot noted, we are taking a little bit more time in light of comments by stakeholders as well as feedback from the MSC and the DMM with regards to our intended proposal, which raised concerns that many parties would not opt into it, both because of the pricing and how it would actually effectuate through the market, how it would actually work through. And so we're taking a little bit more time, not a whole lot because we don't have too much time. However, between now and December, we'd like to consider some of the input from the DMM and the MSC as well as stakeholders to see if we can come up with a alternative that would allow for parties to opt into this assistance energy option, which is our intended course of action, is to actually provide an option that's viable both for Western EIM entities as well as the CAISO itself. So over the next few weeks, as I noted, we will be taking some time to refine the final proposal. We had already posted our final proposal. We'll have to revise it, and we'll have comments. We hope to publish the paper by next week or so. We'll have a call later in November and comments to follow so that we can come back to the joint governance meeting in December with a proposal. And as you might recall, based on my last briefing, this also included a number of other elements that pretty much we expect to remain intact in terms of the additional elements that we were clarifying and refining through our proposal. So I would also like to note, because there has been some concerns around whether this is the last time we do an evaluation of the resource efficiency evaluation, we actually expect that we'll continue to have discussions with stakeholders on refinements and enhancements to the RSE. And in light of some of the comments that we received, and acknowledging that we couldn't get everything done by next summer, we do anticipate that we'll have a phase 3 of this RSCE, and we'll provide some more information on that phase of RSCE to address concerns. The next item I was going to touch on is the energy storage enhancements. And the energy storage enhancements has been a initiative that addresses 4 key reliability areas with regards to the integration of storage facilities in our system in the markets, which of course also affect the Western energy imbalance market. And we have looked at a number of improvements to the formulation for the state of charge of storage resources. We've been looking at enhancing some bidding requirements for those storage resources that provide ancillary services, which is a product that's not available in the Western EIM, but a product that we do optimize in the ISO BAA. We also are looking for improvements to exceptional dispatch tools and improvements tools for efficiently capturing storage resources when we're making commitment for local resources. And finally, we are looking for enhancements, to make some enhancements to co-located model of these resources where the storage resources are maybe co-located with another generating resource, usually with a renewable resource located with the storage facility. And in this case, we're looking for enhancements to the modeling of co-located resources that seek to benefit from the investment tax credits. These items have been at play for some time now. We're wrapping up our final proposal, which we hope to post in the next few weeks, and we'll be hosting a stakeholder meeting later this month with these proposed changes to come to the December Board of Governors and governing body meeting, which is under a joint jurisdictional classification. And we anticipate that these changes will be available from implementation next year, some of which may be as early as next summer. We're not yet certain on that, but that's our expected course of action on those. So that covers the storage enhancements. The next item I'd like to cover is the extended day ahead market. And as I know you are all aware, we've been working really hard this year with stakeholders to provide a model for extending and including in the day ahead market a ability for other balancing authority areas to actually participate in a day ahead market. And that would be an option for entities that are not currently, but an entity that is in the Western Energy Imbalance market to be able to also have a day ahead market component to their participation in a centralized market. There's been a lot of activity. I'll focus on an update since our last discussion. We did receive a good amount of comments on September 26th from stakeholders. Stakeholders overall recognize that the additional detail provided in the proposal and the evolution of the design was beneficial and appreciated the evolution since in our straw proposal. But there was a couple of areas of concern, and we've been focused on those with stakeholders and looking to provide some improvements in our draft final proposal, which we're targeting to post Monday the 31st on Halloween Day. The two areas that you'll see enhancements on, and we'll introduce a more robust and balanced approach to addressing resource efficiency failure consequences in the day ahead, and we are introducing tiered consequences to respond to some concerns with regards to the prior formulation of the consequence of failures. We'll also be looking to continue to have a financially administrative surcharge that is imposed for those with the differential tiers. We also will be introducing and refining our transmission elements of the proposal that, based on a lot of feedback from stakeholders in this area, we want to make sure that the contributions, the use of transmission rights that entities in the EDAM areas hold, that we can respect in the EDAM those rights as closely and feasible as possible under the OAT construct, recognizing that once you transition to the market, there are differences on how those rights get handled, but we would like to make sure that that we honor those rights as closely as possible. Overall, we think the design is definitely moving towards a robust, well-informed proposal based on the extensive amount of discussions with stakeholders, and we're hopeful to provide you this December with a comprehensive briefing on the final proposal for the EDAM design. We're looking to have another stakeholder meeting in November after we post our draft final proposal on the 31st. We're thinking of November 14th for that stakeholder meeting, and we anticipate a publication of the final proposal before the briefing in December so that we can wrap things up. We'll have comments after we post on the 31st. We anticipate to have comments in writing from stakeholders towards the end of November. I think the date is November 30th, but I don't want to misspeak on that one, but towards the end of November. So that gives us some time to then wrap up, which we hope to be a smaller number of comments as we refine the proposal and be able to provide you a full briefing in December of what's to come, and then take this for a decision in February of 2023. The next item I'd like to touch on is the day-ahead market enhancement. And the day-ahead market enhancement has been a stakeholder initiative that is currently underway, but has been underway for some time. And in the day-ahead market enhancements, what we have been looking to do with stakeholders is to introduce a new product in the day-ahead market that allows us to procure for uncertainty that occurs in the real time, but to be able to procure for that uncertainty through the energy market in the day ahead. We have been working with stakeholders on a number of issues, and we're trying to close out some additional elements to that. We know that the Imbalance Reserve product is pivotal in providing the benefits of the diversity that we can harness through the EDAM market, and we hope to be able to complete this for a briefing in December as well, with in anticipation of also seeking approval of these enhancements in February of 2023 as well, because that will allow us to really complete our efforts on providing the diversity benefits we hope to provide through the EDAM. Finally, I'll touch on the transmission service scheduling priorities enhancement, also known as the Wheel-Through Initiative. That initiative, we've been working on that for some time as well after we adopted the interim proposal that's currently at play. And since we last spoke on this item, and I last reported to you on this, we've been working to complete our draft final proposal so that, or next iteration of the proposal, so that we can bring this to closure and approval by the Board of Governors in February of 2023 as well. So we are now completing our design on an option that was largely supported based on the comments we received to provide a ATC, an available transmission capacity based approach that allows us to quantify what available transmission capacity is available for external parties to request and receive priority wheeling service for in advance of the operational time space. We're looking at a 13-month rolling window where parties can request for this service. We've also been spending a lot of time on what the methodology for evaluating and quantifying what amount of capacity is necessary and needs to be considered for CAISO native load before we allow for the allocation of additional capacity to external parties to wheel through the system at this higher priority. And once parties can access that higher priority, the priority would be equal to CAISO load, CAISO BAA load, native load. So we're currently running some numbers based on the methodologies that we were looking at to ensure that through our analysis that we're deriving an amount of transmission and set aside that is reasonably and reliably provides sufficient amounts of capacity set aside for native load, but also ensures that what is made available is physically feasible for the wheel-throughs. We're running some numbers around that. We hope to have that information in the next iteration of the proposal. So through this analysis, we're also hoping to sort of provide some insights on how the tests and the various levels of transmission capacity set-asides, what the numbers actually look like and what's actually going to be available. And that, of course, will be a prospective look view of that, not an actual hardwired number, since it will depend once we implement the proposal what the actual numbers will be. But we hope to provide some insights around that based on our assessment. We also will provide, as part of this proposal, an alternative way of receiving firm wheel-throughs, which is a pathway for entities to request for long-term rights for wheel-throughs that we would study and pursue and determine whether transmission upgrades are needed. And we would study this, consistent with our existing techniques for interconnection of resources, so that we can determine what additional upgrades would be needed for the provision of such service. If we were to determine, for example, that or a member, a customer wanted to have transmission rights beyond what we can provide through the process, the ATC process I described earlier. So that would also be a part of this proposal. So in terms of timeline, we're looking to post a revised draw proposal, the next iteration of our proposal, in the middle of November. And then we're looking to post a draft final proposal before by early next year, again moving towards a decision to the Board of Governors in February of 2023. So it's going to be a busy February for us all, but that's our current trajectory on that. So that covers the 5 items I plan on covering today, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Sorry about that. I was on mute. Anna, you did not fail to deliver on the new news, and I think we'll be busy, quite busy over the next 3 months. So let me go to questions or comments from the governing body members. And Andy?
Thanks, Chair Kanzioka. Thanks, Anna. My question is actually related to the next slide that shows the calendar. And there's sort of parentheticals that show proposed classification, decisional classifications under the January 31st decisional. There's 2 items that I saw something different here than I maybe had seen before. So transmission, service, and scheduling priorities says proposed joint authority decisional classification. The last staff proposal I recall was advisory, and then also day ahead market enhancements also says proposed joint, and the last staff proposal I saw there was kind of a mixed bag, but most of the issue, like one issue was proposed joint, a bunch proposed advisory, and then even some proposed none of the above. So I wanted to mention that, see if you had any thoughts on that, those proposed classifications.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, governing body member Campbell. I think those are oversights with regards to the transmission service scheduling priorities. That has been a proposed advisory item, as you know, because it does pertain to transmission service that we provide on the CAISO BAA. So we'll make sure to correct that. On the day ahead market enhancements item, there has been some confusion back and forth. I don't have a final proposed decisional classification for that. It will probably come in our next iteration of the proposal, which we're looking to provide later this year. But there are some elements that suggest that it may be joint, and depending on where the governance structure, the governance evolution lands, that may trigger a different classification. That's perhaps why that was listed that way. But for full transparency, we should make sure that the transmission service scheduling priorities one is not proposed. That would be under advisory, sorry, not joint. That would be under advisory authority for classification. And we'll make sure to correct that in future elements. And then with the day ahead market enhancements one, I think we'll take some time to consider that carefully for the next iteration of the proposal.
Thank you.
Anita.
So, and I just want to express this during our briefing. I really want to say how much I appreciate you guys delaying the RSC and taking another look at some of the feedback that you've gotten both from MSC, DMM, and stakeholders, and from the governing body. So I really think it will bode well for a better end solution and give more time for people to get their head around what you're proposing and the changes that will come about from the feedback you've gotten more recently. So thank you to you and your team for that for taking that second look.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
And I'm going to now check on public comments or questions. So, Roy, if we can go back to public comments and questions at this point.
Once again, if you would like to make a public comment, please click on that raise hand icon at the bottom of the Zoom window. Or if you would like to make a question over the phone, if you are phone only, please go ahead and press #2 on your telephone keypad. All right, it looks like we have no comments at this time.
Okay, and thank you. That was a lot of material to go through, and as the governing body members have noted, it's very appreciated in keeping us informed and understanding just exactly how we're moving forward and what's coming up. So thank you.
Thank you, and have a good rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you. Our last agenda item is the informational reports, and I will ask the governing body members if they have any questions on any of the informational reports that have been posted. And I am not seeing any, so with that, I'm going to do one last check with the governing body. Any last minute items that you want to raise? Whoa. No, I thought I saw a hand, and I do not. Okay, so seeing none, we completed our meeting, and we stand adjourned. I appreciate everyone's participation in the meeting, and thanks to everyone for listening. Bye now.
Thank you, Chair Conzioka.
Thank you all. All the best. Take care.